Hey guys, it's Lauren. Happy Sunday morning. Excuse me. Enjoy my cat mug. So I drink tea now. Part of my goal for 2019 was to give up alcohol for the year. Not that not that I'm accustomed to drinking alcohol in the morning, but I bring that up because in the evenings when I get home from work and I'm hating my job or I'm just stressed out at life or whatever, I got in the habit of pouring a glass of wine. And of course, wine doesn't come in single glasses. It comes in bottles. Sometimes it comes in multiple bottles, as Ernest Hemingway could tell you, and many after him. So that needed to be nipped before it got a little bit out of hand. So I got in the habit of making tea when I came home and drinking a ridiculous amount of tea, and I've never really cared for tea. I'm still not sure that I like tea. I enjoy that it's warm and it's kind of comforting to hold, but somehow it sort of eased its way in and began replacing coffee, which is why I'm drinking it now. I didn't give up coffee, but I'm finding that I might prefer tea, at least in some sense. So, all that to say, I have tea in this cat mug, and I'm not drinking alcohol in the morning. Not that I ever was, at least not since grad school. So, anyway, good morning. Sorry, 2 minutes gone. So, I wanted to make this video because I did an Instagram Q&A last week, and somebody asked me a really great question about basically how I get so much stuff done. And that was reflected later in a couple of comments that I got on various photos and videos in the last week or two that just kind of had this very synchronous feel about it, pertaining to work ethic and basically how does one get stuff done? Because I do a lot, and if you're not living in my house with me, so only Oliver, like you really don't get the full picture of everything that I do, but you probably get the sense from watching me on social media that there's always a lot going on, and that's true. That's how I run my life. That's how I prefer to be, particularly as I've gotten older. I wouldn't say that I don't like idleness so much as I don't know what to do with it. I'm one of those people who feels a lot of guilt for not being productive, whatever that means, and that's a personal issue that I need to work on, okay? Because there's a balance to be struck, and particularly as a classroom teacher, I'm learning that I actually need periods of time where I just lay on a couch and watch something mindless, and that is all I do. Sometimes I just need to lay on the couch and not have any kind of stimuli. So I'm kind of trying to train myself to slow down when I need to, but I'm not great at it, and it's definitely not my preferred state. So I thought I would talk a little bit about how I managed to do so much without keeling over and burning the house down or destroying my life, at least so far. I mean, I just told you about my alcohol problem. So, anyway, don't come home from work and drink multiple bottles of wine. It's a bad idea, if for no other reason than that it's really expensive. So anyway, for those of you who don't know me, or you're new, or I don't know what I've talked about recently. I am a writer. I'm working on a couple of books right now. I've got a book out with Llewellyn. And I try to blog. I'm kind of a bad blogger because I don't know. That's probably another video. But I spend a lot of time on social media doing things like interacting in witchcraft communities, doing promotion work for my own writing, that kind of thing. A lot of my socializing happens online. I'm also a graduate student. I'm working on a second master's degree in English literature, and I'm a full-time student, which means that I take 6 credits a semester. 6 credits is full-time in graduate school land, so I do that. I work full-time. I work a 40 to 50 hour job as a public school teacher. And I also have a couple of extracurriculars. I practice historical European martial arts. I'm kind of in this weird nebulous space with HEMA right now because I'm in the process of moving, and it's just impossible for me to make it regularly to classes. So I've been kind of bouncing back and forth between my home club and the club in the new city that I'm in. Realistically, I'm probably only going like 2 or 3 times a month total between both. So not great. That's not, I'm counting on that changing when I'm actually settled. But lots going on there. So that's a lot. And how do I do all of those things without exploding? So in thinking about things like productivity and kind of what we do with our lives generally, I frame things in terms of true will and the great work. And you should hear the capital letters when I say those things. In many magical traditions, there's this idea that we have a divine will, like capital W will, which is kind of like our destiny or our purpose in life, the thing that we have to accomplish to progress in our various incarnations, etc. Like that idea, or variations on that idea, exist in a number of traditions, including Wicca, including the OTO, the Golden Dawn, like the Western magical traditions. There's this idea that we're put here for a purpose. And part of what we're doing as magicians is figuring out what that purpose is and then fucking doing it. So that's a really simplified way of putting things, okay? But that's the framework that I'm operating in when I think about my life. So a lot of the struggles I think that happen when we're in particularly like our late teens or early 20s, when people are telling us we need to make decisions and it's time to grow up, and there's this kind of nebulous period, particularly in the United States, where I think young people don't have any way of really marking adulthood. So we spend our 20s and sometimes even our early 30s just sort of floundering around, feeling like, being in between. A lot of folks are still dependent financially on their parents or their families until well into their 20s at this point. I think in the United States, the average age is like 26. People are getting married later, people are having children later. So anyway, I think that trend, aside from just people having more options available to them, I think a lot of that has to do with people just not having a sense of purpose in life. I don't think we do a great job of helping each other find that purpose. And it took me a long time too. But I feel like I figured it out. And it took journaling over the course of my whole life and kind of going back and figuring that out. So for me, I really wanted a couple of things consistently in my life. One was to practice witchcraft, and the other one was to write. And I couldn't have articulated either of those things in any real detail, but those were the things that I was pursuing. And once I became conscious of that, I made decisions to make those things happen. Like if you watch Game of Thrones, there's this wonderful scene with Peter Baelish where he's explaining to Sansa Stark that every step he makes is one step towards the Iron Throne, and when he's trying to make a decision, he just asks himself, will this take me to where I want to go? Sorry about the spoiler, but we're like 7 seasons in, so whatever. Anyway, that's kind of how I function. When I'm making choices about my life, I ask myself, how will this impact my practice and development as a witch? How will this impact me as a coven leader? How will this impact my religious practice? And I also ask myself, how does this further my career as a writer? Those are questions that are always at the fore. So a good example is in thinking about graduate school. Graduate school is kind of this life-consuming, ridiculous thing. I think kind of regardless of what discipline you're in, although I think the humanities are a special brand of hell, okay? Just because aside from it eating your life, everybody's telling you that you're wasting your time. And it's so very expensive. Um, anyway, when I work in school, and this was true when I was in religious studies too, I am very careful to choose classes and engineer assignments, papers, presentations in such a way that they all kind of fuel the same thing. So for me, that's writing about witchcraft. I can find a way to write about witchcraft and magic in pretty much any class, and I do, which means that every semester I finish with at least one and probably two articles about witches, which I may then modify later for publication, submit to conferences, or whatever. But I never write a paper unless it's going to double dip and do something else. I find a way. I'm taking a Victorian literature class right now, and I'm writing about the occult revival. Like, you know, the paper topic has something to do with Jane Eyre and Oliver Twist, and that's fine, but let's talk about institutionalized religion and what's happening in the religious landscape and how that impacts the novels, sure, but how can I really just talk about the Golden Dawn and then witches? Like, that's just how my brain works. So I find that nothing I'm doing is without a purpose. That's how I function in school. So in that sense, school doesn't become overwhelming because I feel like it's contributing to both my craft and to my career as a writer. That's how that works. The thing that's really big in terms of getting things done is prioritizing. I think it's really easy to look at somebody online and think that, you know, they're really successful or their life is easy or something. I teach high schoolers. I teach 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds, and they're real good at thinking that because somebody is successful, it must mean that they're lucky or talented. And there's nothing I hate more than just people trying to rely on talent to get through things, because my life has taught me, and I believe pretty fervently, that hard work will trump talent any day. Any day. Like, you can be brilliant, but if you don't know what you're doing with that, then it doesn't matter, unless you're extremely lucky. And frankly, a lot of those people end up dead. Like, just look at the music industry. Like, everybody I love died in their mid-20s. Okay, many of them of drug overdoses. And I think it's because of that, like, I don't know, that's not a thing to aspire to as far as I'm concerned. I would rather be kind of mediocre, but just really, really hardworking. So I make choices about what I do and what I don't do. It's important to me to be a writer, so I find ways to do that. When I'm at work, I'm not paying attention in the meeting. Like, I'm I'm writing. This is one of the reasons why I write my books by hand. On the one hand, yes, it helps me process. It's beautiful. I enjoy it, all that. But on a very practical level, it means that I can do it anywhere. There are no wasted minutes. If I'm sitting at a metro stop, or if I'm bored in a class, if I have a planning period at work, if I'm trapped in a meeting that's useless, because they're all useless, I can be writing my book, and that's what I'm doing. I learned pretty quickly. This was something I picked up in grad school. There's never a period of several hours where you can really just like sit down and write. Like, those things don't happen. And I think a lot of people, when they don't accomplish things, it's because they're waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment. Like, it's never coming. There will never be. I will never have the kind of life where I can sit and write for multiple hours every day. It just isn't going to happen. So in lieu of that, I write in 10-minute bursts, 15-minute bursts, 5 minutes here, 40 minutes there. I'm really excited if I can get an hour in. That's great. But books happen minute by minute. Papers happen minute by minute. Like, that's how my life functions. So if you've got just a little bit of time, I think taking advantage of that is the key to getting things done. We're accustomed to break things down in terms of hours, or like, I don't know, scheduling stuff doesn't necessarily work for me super well. I have to just kind of steal minutes when I can, and that's how I operate. But also just making choices. There's a lot of things that I do, as I've said, but there's a lot of things that I don't do, and that's what people don't see. I do not have children. And honestly, like, this is a big part of the reason why, because it's not part of my divine will. It's not It's not a priority for me. I am getting married next month, somewhat unconventionally, but that was a big part of my life choices too. Like, I never prioritized relationships. I saw how my friends would get distracted and stop doing the things they cared about, and that to me spoke really negatively about partnership and marriage. I've made different decisions since then, obviously, but one of the reasons that the relationship I have works really well is because he respects that I'm a writer and I'm a witch and this is what's important to me, and like, that just has to be accepted. So, what else? I don't watch a lot of TV. When I do watch TV, it's usually a show that I'm obsessed with that only has like a season and I get an episode a week, like Game of Thrones, The Magicians, or something like that. Or it's some kind of comfort movie that I'm playing in the background, or something that I don't have to pay attention to just because I like the sound. It helps me to work. But I don't sit in front of the TV and do nothing. Like, I actually just physically can't at this point. And there's lots of people who, like, that's their downtime, and I'm totally not shaming people who are into that. My fiance is a major movie lover, and like, we love, like, yeah, there's stuff that we really love. So there's definitely a time and a place to sit down and watch something. But for me, I have a hard time doing that because I'm thinking about doing other things. So even when we sit and watch a movie, unless we're in a theater, I like to have a notebook, and I like to be kind of, sketching out tomorrow or planning whatever, So, yeah, there's stuff that I just don't do. I don't go out very often. I go to bed early and I get up really early, and it's because I know I'm more functional in the morning. It's the best. It's when my mind is the sharpest, so I do all of my work in the morning. Yeah, so there's a lot that I don't do. If you've ever tried, if you're a friend of mine and you've tried to email or text me and you notice that it takes me sometimes days to get back to you, it's not personal. It's because I'm just like really, really bad at that stuff. I'm thinking about other things, and like, honestly, my social relationships suffer sometimes. And that's a thing that I'm working on, but I think that's a consequence of how I function. And sometimes it's really shitty. And that's one of the cool things about Wicca in particular, is the emphasis that it places on balance. So I have this responsibility to try to kind of figure that stuff out and, find a middle ground at certain points. But there's a line to be walked there too, because I think if you are really passionate about something, then a lot of the times other things fall away. There's this, so I really like the show House. Probably not the best show to model anybody's life on, but there's this really wonderful episode where House, the doctor, is treating, I think he's a trumpet player, and he's sick, he's got some kind of lung disease, and everybody thinks he's dying. And he relates to House because neither one of them has anybody, like nobody comes to the hospital to visit him, his life is kind of a mess, but he's this brilliant musician. And he says something to House to the effect of like, you know what it's like. And what he's talking about is genius. He's talking about talent and genius, and how when you are that brilliant, other things in your life suffer. So like House is he's this horrific human being, but he's this genius doctor. And here's this trumpet player who can't keep his life everything sucks, okay, but he's this brilliant musician. And I'm not comparing myself to that. I do not think that I'm brilliant. I do not think I'm a genius. But when I was in music school, I had people around me who definitely were. Like, if you haven't seen a genius musician with perfect pitch and it's seriously like looking at a different class of human being. And as an 18 and 19-year-old, it was genuinely scary. So being around people like that, what I noticed was that one of the costs of brilliance seemed to be everything else. And that's another reason why I think a lot of really talented people tend to die young, at least in music. So I think that when you love something and you make it your priority, I think it's really easy to lose sight of other things. And there's a line to be walked. So I wouldn't say that, I don't know, like my life is a mixed bag. I'm really blessed and I'm really lucky. And a lot of that has to do with choices that I've made, but I've also made some really, really bad choices, like impossibly bad choices. I just spent the first 2 minutes of this video talking to you about like my relationship with alcohol, okay? And that's not even like a quarter of it, okay? I could tell you some stories. So, I don't know, like I think we're all just learning and figuring it out. So that's where I guess my productivity comes from, or that's the source of my work ethic, if I can be said. I don't know if that's the phrase I want to use. I know what I want out of my life, at least most of the time. I think it would be hubris to say that I totally had a handle on something like my own will at this point, capital W. But it's something that I'm striving to do, and I feel like I get closer every year. But it's just a question of what you want in the world. And I think that there are certain choices that you make that necessarily preclude other choices. I think particularly in the United States right now, we tell people that they can do everything and anything. And we do this to women all the time, right? Like you can be a mom and you can be a successful CEO. And then the woman feels like shit when she finds out that actually maybe she can't, like maybe doing both those things at the same time, like maybe it's not healthy or desirable. Maybe she doesn't really want to. And if she makes a choice, we make her feel like a bad person, like she's doing feminism wrong or something. This kind of thing happens all the time. So there's a line like, on the one hand, I think people are capable of an awful lot, and I think most of the time when you really want something, it's a question of how much effort are you willing to put into it. On the other hand, I think that we can't have everything. I think sometimes choices need to be made. So, yeah, I'm choosing to write books, and I'm choosing to be a voice in particular communities, in academia and in paganism, and that's what's important to me. And I think that that means necessarily that I'm not going to do other things. So whether that's the right choice or not, but like that's how stuff happens. So anyway, this is a long ass video, and I hope you guys are having a lovely Sunday. And my tea in my cat mug is kind of cold right now, so it's not as comforting as it could be, but what have you. Okay, I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, you know what? So I just recorded that last video and I listened to it, and there's a couple of things that I left out that I think are really, really significant. So hooray, here you're gonna get 2 videos. So if you didn't watch the first one, you may want to. I don't know if this one is gonna stand alone very well. But a couple of things about that. In talking about my work and kind of the idea of divine will and the great work and moving forward, I think it's a problem for me to not talk about 2 things. First of all, I want to talk about depression. And second, I want to talk about my relationship with my coven mates. Okay. So first off, with regard to kind of my life and how I structure things and my work, etc., I think that if I don't include stories about depression, I'm not telling the whole picture. So my life definitely comes from a place, like how I think about the world, how I write, the voice that I have, all of that stuff is the product of my life experiences. And one of the reasons why I've gone through life being kind of frankly, an overachiever, a high achiever, right? Like I'm totally a brown-nosing student. Like I'm like desperate for approval. Okay. But a lot of that has to do with being depressed and feeling like and this, just for the record, like depression is this is a clinical condition I'm talking about. This isn't because like my life is tragic. It's just like my brain actually just doesn't make chemicals the way it's supposed to. So sometimes I just have these sort of inexplicable things that happen in my brain that I have to watch. And like I take medication for it, okay? And millions and millions of Americans do. It's really, really normal. So it's not something I'm embarrassed about. But one of the reasons why I latch on to things and I like have to sort of rabidly see it to the end is because I feel like trash when I feel like I'm not successful. Like if I'm not number one in whatever the thing is, it must be because I'm worthless. Like my brain doesn't do middle ground very well. It never has. I've been this way since I was a little kid, which is how I know it's a chemical imbalance, and not just like the result of trauma or something, which is another factor, okay, for sure. But yeah, like I've always just had this need since I was a very little girl. My sense of self-worth came from what other people thought about me. And I think that there are things in place in our culture, in our society, that sort of bolster that, particularly with women, okay, but really with everybody, all right? So I'm not always sure that my work ethic is something to be praised. I think sometimes it's a problem. The need to find others, particularly strangers, because here's the other thing, like this is also how like depression and anxiety can play out. When somebody who you love or who you know loves you, like a parent or a best friend or a partner or whoever, when those people tell you that you're worthwhile or you're beautiful or you're smart or whatever, there's this tendency to place less value on those opinions than on the opinions of strangers. So for me growing up, what I really wanted wasn't so much my parents' approval as it was my teacher's approval, right? I didn't want, it wasn't enough for my friends to tell me I was worthwhile. I had to have like random strangers tell me that I was worthwhile. Like I had to be accepted out into the wider world. Anyway, I've been in therapy for a number of years, and like I said, I've been on medication. Like I'm in treatment for these kinds of things, and like I said, I'm talking about millions and millions, and I don't even know how many people who deal with these and kind of similar problems. So I'd be wary of heaping too much praise on this model of super productivity. I've got a couple of self-help books on my shelf right now that kind of have been circulating in bullet journal communities about like productivity and, you know, how to accomplish, you know, as much as you would in a year in only a few weeks and that kind of stuff. Like how to, I don't know. Like I kind of eat stuff like that up because it fuels this need that I have to be the best at things, because I feel like I'm trash if I'm not the best at things. And I don't know, I don't think that that's a mindset that we really need to be encouraging most of the time. So for me, a lot of the times my self-care entails me forcing myself to be idle, you know, to sit and watch a show on TV and not do other things. So that's a thing to be considered too. I think when we're looking at something like life's purpose, I really think that there's a balance. I think that that's kind of part of the human experience, is figuring that stuff out. And there are a number of religious traditions, magical traditions that are encouraging us to essentially be more than human, right? This idea of ascension. And the thing that people miss about that is that it's a destructive thing. Like that's not to say that it's not desirable necessarily, but you know, even think about like in the Bible, right? When people see angels or when people hear God, like it destroys people. I mean, you know that just by watching episodes of Supernatural, right? Like angels, you can't even hear their voices without your head exploding, okay? So this idea of transcending, of encountering the divine, of encountering other worlds actually destroys some part of your humanity. And however you feel about that personally, that's a theme that exists in magical traditions. So I think that that's something to kind of keep in the back of our minds, like as we're working forward. I think that there's a need to consider balance, okay? The second thing that I wanted to bring up was my relationship with my coven mates, because I think this is one of the things that makes Wicca really, really special, and traditional Wicca in particular really, really special, is the bond that exists between coven mates, where the shitty stuff, right, and the figuring stuff out, like you're not alone in those things. So I mentioned in the prior video that like I'm not great at relationships, and I've always had this particular idea about relationships that, and I honestly, like, I think this has to do with growing up as an army brat. Like I think it might just be that simple. Like relationships are kind of this temporary thing where you have people in your life, and then when you move away, like that's kind of the end of it. Because that was sort of my experience growing up. Not so much because we moved around a lot, but because like everybody else did. Okay, and even when I was settled into a school environment. I went to school in DC, and we commuted from all over the place. The way the DC and the Maryland and Northern Virginia suburbs kind of operate is the metro stations, like the metro lines, the buses and the trains, are so far spread. It's one of the best public transportation systems in the world. So I had friends coming from Maryland, from Virginia, from all over DC. So it's not like I could go next door and hang out with friends. Like that didn't happen for me. So I saw my friends at school, and that was pretty much it. And when we weren't in school, we didn't see each other. So yeah, I really didn't make and keep friends in college. I had a core group of friends who didn't even go to the same college as I did. And like I kept 2 of them, and they're still in my life, and nobody else is. Like that's just how it worked. So that was my experience growing up. And I was lucky to find a community in Charlotte where that was no longer the case. So I have to talk about Corvus, the Corvus, because I believe that, I don't know, like the way our lives have intertwined, like I think we kind of bring up each other's issues, and I like to think that we challenge each other in such a way to push through those issues, and I think that's why we're close. But Corvus has really been the one to shift my attitudes about relationships, and I don't know, like she was like that from the moment I met her. Like before we were very close, early on when we would hang out, like she was always just kinder than I was accustomed to, I guess. And working with her in magical spaces, and then meeting the rest of the people who would come to make up Foxfire, and realizing that like maybe I don't have to choose between, you know, being successful and also being cared about. Like that was a lesson that came really late in my life. And in some ways that's really shitty, but in other ways like how lucky am I? So yeah, the cool thing about being in a coven is that you're not doing it by yourself. And it's not because it can't be done by itself. It can. But I have people who I know are like in the struggle with me, and that's really cool. And like we're magically tied to each other in such a way that I trust, really for one of the first times in my life, that these people will be in my life forever. And that's not an experience that I'd had before. Not because people are assholes, okay, but because I really wasn't open to that possibility. I mean, I'm the one who's responsible for so many of my relationships crumbling in the past. But yeah, like seeing that there were alternatives has been really important. And that's one thing that kind of keeps me grounded. And I find that, you know, that doesn't get in the way of my productivity, right? So I don't know. That's something that I've been really conscious about working on in the last few years, is being more mindful of my social relationships, tending to those things, and, you know, not just being neglectful because they're not productive. I'm having the hardest time recording this video. The phone rings or somebody walks in the door or something. So anyway, I don't know where that cut off, but all this to say, Corvus is amazing, and as are the rest of the people in Foxfire. And yeah, I'm really lucky. And as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the biggest benefits of coven work, is having the opportunity to build relationships. Yes, it furthers your magical practice, but one of the ways it does that is by helping you get kind of your mundane shit in order too. So anyway, there's two long videos for you, and I hope that you, I don't know, leave with some additional insight into not just how my brain works and how I do stuff, but also like what's going on in your own life as far as the things that you want to accomplish. And I also think just generally we all need to have a healthier attitude about what success is, what productivity really means, and what its costs are, like what that looks like, and also how those things intertwine with human experience and our relationships. I think that a lot of these issues, like, yes, I want to be a writer, I want to do these things, but I think that we can't talk about these things without also talking about capitalism and how capitalism drives people to think in terms of what can this thing make for me or do for me or accomplish for me. And that might be okay to some extent, but I think a lot of the times it's really destructive. Who am I being productive for? So yeah, anyway, some things to think about, and I'm going to go make more tea now in my cat mug. So bye guys, hope you're having a good day.